Hey, what's going on, nation? Today in the lab, we got a comedian. No, not me. We're bringing our Scott Edwards into the lab today. An actual guy who's funny.
Hi, I'm Keith Bilous, and this is Live in the Lab. All right. A little bit of weirdness in front of the camera there for anybody who's watching, because I'm like, hey, where's the button? Where's the button? I can't get it going. How did you go viral on TikTok? You were on America's Got Talent. How much do you get paid to be on AGT? Oh, you didn't get paid. Keith and Steve here in Live in the Lab.
You're a great interviewer. I love it.
48 miles, 48 hours. And not just once. You ain't seen nothing yet. I hit 50 last time, and I'm like, yeah, things are a little different than they were 10 years ago. So trust me, things are to keep. You have no time for the BS that much of society seems to put on the table. Why is that? Like, what you're talking about is real right now. There's just no bullshit here, but it's just real. We brought you in with some Marley. I said, Joseph, let's talk music for a second. You said, well, Keith, oldies, 60s, 70s, and 80s. I've never talked to a sir before. Why are you a sir? In many ways, we're the same story. I came from nothing. You came from nothing. I think the old saying goes that if you want a trophy, you climb Everest. If you want respect, you climb K2. I've built an airline myself, and it's pretty fascinating when you can have a conversation with yourself with your own knowledge. Have you done that before? Why are we rushing to make these tools if they're all they're going to do is hurt humanity? Does the world need an Oppenheimer moment with AI?
What a fun show.
Hey, we're back. Not the funny guy. Hey, the first 12-second hook again. We got a funny guy coming up in the lab. Our Scott Edwards. He made me laugh before we came onto the show today, so I think he's funny. Apparently he's funny. But I don't know if he's a comedian or a business owner because he owns a bunch of comedy clubs. So he actually might not be funny. So if you just want a business guy who owns comedy clubs, then this might be the show for you. If you want a guy who's funny, well, you can stick around for me because I know I'm funny. At least my kids think I'm funny. Not really, because they're old now. But Scott Edwards is funny guy. So stick around for some fun, some laughter, business conversation, and all that today here in the lab. It's a Thursday, dating the show. What you do in an evergreen kind of situation. What's going on? So I got a couple things for you guys today. 2 things for you to learn today. You know how I like to give out nuggets, the old golden nuggets. All right, so first of all, the first thing you're going to learn from me today, the first thing, courtesy of Dan Go, actually. You know, super LinkedIn guy super physically fit guy on LinkedIn. I think his purpose in life is to, let me just kind of check here, because I think it's kind of fascinating to me. His mission is to, I just need to clarify this. So Dan's mission is I appreciate your patience. On a mission to help 1 million people transform their lives. Not a couple people, 1 million people. So one of the ways he's transforming people's lives, helping them live longer. Dan can help you live longer. Scott, pay attention to this, because Dan Go can make you and I live longer. So I did a test this morning. Dan put out a test video and said, hey, if you can do this, you can live longer. So let me show you the test that Dan put out. And I did it today to see if I could live longer. This is the one.
Finally getting around to this repost you said on how we can live longer if we can do this. So I think I'm going to live longer. Check this out. Now I can even do it with weight. Let's grab the old 45. So apparently, if you can do this, you'll live longer. Thanks, Dan Go.
Hey, so there you have it. I'm going to live longer. So you're all stuck with me. You're stuck with me for many years because you know I show up. I've been showing up every fucking day since I've started this show. And now I got proof that I'm here for the long run. The long run. You can commit to me because I'm committing to you. You know I'm not just going to be a fad in your podcast channel or on your YouTube channel. I'm not going away. I'm just not going to go away. And that shows you that I'm not going to go away. So there's your first tip. Second tip, if you're an Apple iPhone owner, and we know that I am because I like to give all those nuggets. And if you're a sports fan, I got the simplest fucking tip for you today. And it's actually ridiculous how simple this is. But when you look into the technology of how apps and the world works these days, I think you're going to thank me. And if you're a sports betting guy and a sports person, you're really going to thank me. And I won't get into all the whys. I believe I know the whys about this. So I'm just going to give you the nuggets so we can get to our conversation with Scott Edwards. But Apple released an app yesterday. They released an app yesterday. It's called the Apple Sports app. Not original. Apple Sports. Yeah. And what it does is it instantly gives you scores. That's it. It opens up instantly, instantly, and then it gives you the scores you need instantly. Now you're thinking to yourself, well, Keith, so what? That's what the fuck, man? How's that benefit to me? I'll tell you how it's a benefit to you. Have you spent any time in sports apps these days? You click open and then it loads and loads and loads and loads and keeps loading. It's loading the ads. It's loading all the content. I just want the fucking score. Just give me the score. So Apple released their Apple Sports app. So if you have an iPhone, I encourage you to download the Sports app. And you'll also see something new, because I'm a nerd, definitely a nerd. You'll also see some new design language within the app. So if you're kind of a nerd like I am, you'll see the new design language happening within there. You're kind of seeing the future, especially when we talk about the Vision Pro and the computing of the future. You will see that in that experience. So there you go. There you have it. The 2 tips for you today. A, how you can live longer. And B, how to get your sports scores faster. They're definitely linked. And you know what? I'm going to give you a bonus thing today. Creators, attention creators. If you're a creator and you're like, yeah, I'm a creator, or I want to be a creator, or I've just lost my job and I need to be a creator, come knock on my door at the lab. We're building a house of personal brands for people like you to help others achieve their big, hairy, audacious goals. So if you're an experienced marathon runner, maybe you're an experienced comedian, and you're like, yeah, I want to teach people how to be comedians. Great, come knock on my door. We'll teach you how to make money monetizing your knowledge so you can teach others. There's probably a little bit of knowledge in your head that we can unlock, put some value behind it, and get others buying into what you learn, what you know, I should say. Anyways, if you're a creator, come knock on my door. We'll unlock that business value inside of you. All right, enough of me. Talk with my hands today. Yeah, just a lot of energy. Great workout today. Oh man, big lift, good lift today. Big bike ride, did 50 Ks on the bike today, and a good lift. So I'm jacked. Let's bring in Scott Edwards. He's over there in the green room. We know how it all works, nation. We're going to bring him in. We're going to have a good chat. It's going to be boring. We're not going to have any laughter, no comedic humor, just boring conversation coming up live on the lab. Scott Edwards.
Hi, Keith.
Hey, that's me. Thanks for...
Oh, man. I'm not a sports guy, and you started talking sports, man, and I just went right out. Anyway. Hey, good to see everybody. People are watching this, or are they listening?
A bit of both. We're live.
They absorb it mentally.
Yeah, we're live on YouTube, X, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We're streaming live on Instagram these days too, Mr. Scott Edwards.
Oh crap, I'm wanted in 2 states. All right. Anyway, well, let's jump into this. When do we start?
I started a few moments ago. I'm glad you were sleeping in the green room while I was getting at it.
It was very exciting stuff. I love that one-legged 45-pound live forever thing. That's pretty good.
Not too bad, eh? I worked on that for a while. I did that on a couple takes. I took the sand out of the weight there, so I took a plastic shield, and it's actually not 45 pounds.
There you go. There you go. Well, I'm so excited to be in the lab.
Thank you,
Keith. This is a big time for me in the lab.
Well, it is, and big time for me because I have a guest on my show that has a live on-air sign on the show. Never had it before. And
well, I do want to clarify to your audience. This is very important.
Please.
You said I'm a comic, and I'm not. I'm not saying I haven't been on stage 1,000 times, and I can't say that people haven't found me sometimes humorous, but I'm a producer of comedy shows and have been for over 40 years. So I've worked with, Jay Leno and Robin Williams and Gary Shandling and Bob Saget and Jerry Seinfeld, and you name it, I've worked with them, but I am not as funny as them.
I have to think a little. So it's interesting to hear you say that because I got to be honest. I did my little bit this morning introducing you as a comedian, and then I was doing some more research and reading about you and your businesses, and I'm thinking to myself, well, he's actually probably not a comedian. However, I said to myself, Uncle Keith, yes, he's worked with these legends like Gary Shandling, like that face of Gary, right? Exactly. Jay and all those, and I'm thinking some of that must have rubbed off a fellow who runs a series of comedy clubs for a while.
Well, rubbing off is not something we talk about publicly, but yeah, we've had some close connections. I should tell everybody, ladies and gentlemen, it's Scott Edwards, and yes. I am a podcast producer. I have produced comedy shows, and I'm a lifelong entrepreneur. Ladies and gentlemen, it's Scott Edwards.
Awesome. See, you've done this before. You've done this before.
I've had the opportunity, Keith, but not in the lab. I'm so excited. I do have to tell you, my white coat is at the cleaners.
Ah, of course. Well, so we only wear green here, though.
Oh, that's right. Well,
Yes.
okay. I would have been. I wouldn't have fit in anyway. All right.
You know why I called it the lab, Scott? So hold on a second here. Should I address you as R or Scott or Edward, plural, Edwards?
No, it's Scott. It's funny. My parents named me for an uncle that had passed away named Robert. And I'm Robert Scott Edwards, but my whole life I've been Scott. But when you have two first names, you go to school and all the teachers are getting up in front of the class going, Bob, Bob. You know, it's like, who the frick is Bob?
Yeah, Robert's a fascinating name, right? It can be Robert, it can be Bob, it can be Bobby, it can be Robbie. You can have like a dozen variations on Robert.
Right. My wife just says shithead. So it all works out.
At least she uses the nice term. Shithead could be worse than shithead.
Well, her nickname is dumb shit. So we work well together.
Wonderful. You guys are off to, how long have you been married?
We're going to be celebrating 25 years this year, but we dated for about 10 years. It's a long, funny story, but I'm very happy to have her as my bride. And she's in law enforcement. So that is a total divergence from where she started, which was a hostess for one of my comedy clubs.
Oh,
yes, I raised her as one of my own.
Oh, yeah, I see that. I there's a whole sort of questions I can ask there, but I won't. Instead, I'm just going to say, I'm sorry that she's had to deal with you for the last 25, 35 years.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I got very blessed with the woman with the most patience because I don't know if you could tell, I can be a little obnoxious.
No, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. So I got to be honest. I sat down here today and I was doing my homework for the show, and I don't do too much prep, if I'm being really frank. And you're a podcast host yourself. You're a producer. I don't do too much prep because I find if I do too much prep, it just puts it into a box, right? And I like it to be organic and authentic and just as if I just met you and just kind of have an honest conversation. Are you joining us from Sacramento today?
Yes, I'm a Northern California born and bred kind of person. Born in Berkeley, California, raised in Fremont, California in the last, I'd say 50 years here in Sacramento. And it's a great place to live. I wouldn't visit here. There ain't shit to see, but we're about an hour and a half from Lake Tahoe and we're about an hour and a half from San Francisco and the coast. So it's one of those things where we're close to fun stuff.
You're close to fun stuff and probably not the big expense of living in the places where the fun stuff exists.
Exactly. And yeah, no, we've love our little town. It's a government town, so the people are a little slow.
Okay.
But that came out well when I had my chain of comedy clubs. We were able to entertain and bridge that gap between the brain dead government people and the world of comedy.
Yeah. Well, we like to entertain and inform. I'm sure in Sacramento, it's inform and maybe entertain.
Exactly. Something similar to that.
Yeah. So how many comedy clubs do you have?
I don't have now. I opened my first club probably before you were born in 1980 here in Sacramento called Laughs Unlimited. And I built it to a chain of 3 clubs and ran it for 21 years. Yeah. But I did sell and retire early at age 44 the first time. And that club is still going. When I opened it, it was the 12th club in the entire country doing full-time comedy, and now it's one of the oldest clubs in the business. So this is where the conversation gets interesting and nerdy for me, so this is where I kind of get nerdy. So there's a comedy club here in town. I'm in Winnipeg, Canada. Don't know if you know where that is. We're just a couple miles up the road from you. Just a little north of us. Just a little north. Yeah, north and then to the left and then just up to anyway. So I'm in Winnipeg, Canada. Comedy club here. It's been here forever. It's the one comedy club in the city. It used to be Yuck Yucks, part of the comedy chain, right? Yuck Yucks. I know Yuck Yucks, right? Yeah. Went under, became Rumors Comedy Club, and that's what it is today. Making a generalized statement. That must be a fucking difficult business to run. Well, what's nice or difficult about a comedy club is that it's not just a comedy club. You're producing a show, yes, but you have to sell drinks, so it's also a bar. But then you want to let people in over 18, so you have to have food, so it's a restaurant. And so what I found challenging when I would warn somebody thinking of going into the comedy business, you're not just building a stage and putting in some seats and producing a show. You have to become a expert in the bar liquor industry, and you have to learn the food industry. And if you're going to succeed, you have to find a way to make money on all three.
Yeah. Scott, what makes a good comedy club?
I think when it's set up correctly, where you've got the focus on the entertainment. I designed a couple comedy clubs, and I made them where the seating went up like an amphitheater and narrowed down into a corner, and that's where the entertainment was. And low ceilings helps keep the laughter in, and it reverberates the energy of the audience, which is beneficial to both the crowd and the comic. Also, you don't want the bar in the room. A lot of clubs have the bar in the showroom, but bars are noisy.
Yeah.
And so I always designed a wall in between the club part and the bar, so that the noises of the bar were kept away from interrupting the show and the audience. So, there's a few tricks there. And then I was a little extra smart. I'm going to knock on wood because it was kind of an accident. But the post show, I had a post show bar, and it was separate upstairs. So I would entertain the people, kick them out, send them to my upstairs bar to make some more money. And then the new audience came in, right? And we're in the front bar. So you have to kind of get them coming and going.
When I make the general statement that it would seem to be a difficult business, is that you're difficult, but also maybe not in the same breath, because people always want laughter, right? So as long as you can have room to bring somebody in who thinks they're funny or is funny, you might bring people to follow that person. No?
Well, what I liked was it's a destination. So it's not like you went to a bar and a comedy show happened, right? Then that's a very difficult entertainment venue, because the people are there to drink, and then all of a sudden someone's trying to entertain. In a comedy club, whether your focus is the comedy, people are there to be entertained. They're paying money at the door, so they're invested in the evening. So they want to have a good time. They're ready to have a good time. And that's the perfect platform for the entertainers to do their stuff.
You mentioned you produce a good show, and you enjoy producing good shows. What is the makeup of a good comedy show?
Again, it's all about the presentation. You want to make sure that you establish that, hey, we're here for a good time. So I would be the MC, and I would welcome the audience, explain kind of the rules. Hey, keep your phones away. There's no recording. And, tell them to take care of, tip the waitresses. Oh, don't just tip them, push them all the way over. And then you get into, you talk about a few things, kind of get the audience warmed up and focused, though. You have to focus them, because when they come in, they're all in their little groups drinking and talking and, hey, what happened at work and stuff. You have to go up. The MC's job is to get the audience focused. Then when you introduce the first act, the audience is there and ready, and you do the introduction to build a little excitement. Man, this guy is out of the Bay Area. He's been doing comedy for a few years. You ready to have a good time? Here he is. It's a little showy. It's definitely show business, but that's what works. And the audience is ready to laugh, ready to have a good time. And to me, that's the one of the secrets to a successful comedy club or a show production.
How has the comedy industry changed, Scott, over the years?
Oh, it's gone to crap. No, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say that. No, it's different.
I can't disagree. I don't think you're incorrect with that statement, and I believe you're being honest with that statement, and you're wrapping humor around it. But I believe your honest to God opinion is it has gone to crap, hasn't it? Because it has.
Well, first off, again, I'm an older gentleman. I started my club when I was 24. And it was in the 80s. And the 80s were like the rock and roll era of stand-up comedy. It was new, it was fresh. We had people like George Carlin kind of open the door for poignant comedy. And then I was very lucky. My very first show, the headliner was George Wallace. He's like the king of Las Vegas. I always had a magician in the middle. But my opening act, it was his very first gig out of Phoenix, Arizona. I paid him $100 for a whole week of work, was Gary Shandling. So I had a chance to work with the best, professionals. And I think some of that has been lost, that the idea of a quote unquote professional comic where they write their own material, they really work it over and over, time and again, so that it works with the audience, instead of just going up and dropping F-bombs and talking about their vaginas and that's the guys. I mean, it's just gotten really crazy.
Yeah, it is
not that I have an opinion, Keith.
No, but this is good. That's why I was because I was around when you opened that comic. I'm a 72 baby. I'm going to be 52 this year. So I was around. I was around back in the 80s at the burgeoning of the comedy era, right? The Seinfelds, the Lenos, the Lettermans, the Shanlings, you name them. Who is today's up and coming Gary Shandling? Jerry Seinfeld, Kevin James, who's waking up every single day today, Scott, saying, I'm going to be the best fucking comedian on the planet? Who is it?
I don't know. I've seen a lot of new young comics, but then they tend to take themselves too seriously, or they get caught up in the woke, political stuff.
I was just about to ask you, Nasorti,
it derails it.
Is that what's wrecked comedy? The wokeness of the world?
Well, no, that's too simplistic. I mean, it's also that in the 80s, comedy was fresh and new. And in the 90s, it was just beaten to hell. There was live comedy shows on all the major networks. You could see comedy on TV. You could hear it on the radio. You could, it wasn't that new shiny toy that I had to play with in the 80s. So in the 90s, we saw I don't know, it got more dispersed. It was it was not new and shiny. It was everywhere. It was overdone, right, Keith? And once it's overexposed, it kind of lost its focus. And what happened was that in the 80s, we were very lucky to have some guys that had already been working in the 70s and all of a sudden got a shot in the 80s. And they'd go on the Tonight Show, and boom, the next day they had a sitcom. Ray Romano's a great example, and a guy that played my club many times. Dana Carvey, I was sitting in a hot tub with him when he got the call to go on Saturday Night Live from Lorne Michaels. So, what seemed like overnight success brought a lot of amateurs and a lot of not professional people into the industry. And when I say that is, people think that Dana Carvey, boom, all of a sudden was famous. Well, he'd been doing his act for, 8-10 years. Ray Romano had been on stage as a regular comic for years before he got, Everybody Loves Raymond. It didn't happen overnight, but it looked that way. So a lot of people that didn't have that responsibility to focus on the industry, to focus on the work it takes to be a professional comic was gone. So in the 90s, it kind of watered down the industry. People weren't putting in the effort. They thought, I'm going to be famous with 3 minutes of comedy instead of, these guys could do an hour easy. I did a concert with Jay Leno that lasted 90 minutes, and he could have kept going. But what's interesting is it's worse today, Keith, because now they think they're funny and they think they're famous if they could do a 30-second TikTok video, right? Where's the work? Where's the effort? Where's the trial and error working on it? I used to use the metaphor that a joke is like a lump of coal, and you have to work it and rework it and rework it and take that big lump of coal and turn it into a gem of a joke or material. It takes time. It takes practice. It takes rehearsal. It takes doing it on stage over and over and over. And that is kind of gone. It's out the window. So I don't really have an opinion at all, Keith.
Listening to you speak, Scott, it's hard. No, I love it.
I kind of went off.
No, man, this is why I do the show, because this is the kind of conversation I strongly desire. It's interesting because when I listen to you speak, I reflect upon my own experience with comedy, and now I start thinking about it. And in many ways, Bob Saget started wrecking it, and I'm going to be serious here. Bob Saget started wrecking comedy when ABC started launching their Sunday night, what was it? That TV show that had always people shooting their videos, right? And it was laughing, and then comedy.
Oh, right. America's Funniest Videos.
That started. That was
George Slaughter produced that. He was big at abusing comedy.
And then that was right at the outset as the internet was being born. And then the internet came out, right? And then exactly gifs and
The
memes.
congruence of problems, right?
Right? GIFs and memes and the Pam and Tommy video. So that, so we're talking comedy and porn. But for a second here, you can see how, no, I'm being serious here. You can see how those two things really, as unique and niche as they are, they really shaped the future of how the internet was going to. So the porn industry is what it is. The comedy industry just kind of went like this. Porn went like this, comedy went down. It's true though.
Well, I don't have as much experience with porn as you do, Keith, but I will bow to the expert, but not too low. And I appreciate that comparison, because it was what I was saying in long form. The short form is, when stand-up comedy was only in comedy clubs, it was really special, unique, and there were professionals.
Exactly.
Then it got abused and overexposed and watered down on TV. You jump ahead another decade, and now it's really watered down and thinned out through the internet. And it did not help the industry. You don't want to think that every Tom, Dick, and Harry is a professional comic. It should be an art. To me, it's an art form. And like any other art form, whether it's painting or dance or theater, it takes work, effort to make it really special. And I think these days, and again, boy, this is going to sound like the old guy on the lawn with his hose. Get off my lawn. But I think people just don't put out the work they used to. They're lazy.
Yeah.
Harry said it. What do you guys think?
So you mentioned Tom, Dick, and Harry, and I didn't expect that we would be getting into a serious part of the conversation, but I got to change camera angles for this one. So I'm going to change my voice and everything.
Should I change mine?
I got a serious question. What was it like being in the hot tub with Dana Carvey?
Well, between the two of us, there wasn't much room for water. No, it was, I've been very blessed that I've had some really funny experiences. In fact, a great story. I was telling you about Gary Shandling was an opening act when I opened my club. But of course, he was so funny. He was a headliner like a few months later. And I was doing a Wednesday night show. There's maybe 18 people in the audience. And Gary's the headliner. He's doing his set. Very funny man. And one of the guys in the audience gets up and goes to the restroom. And Gary stops and he goes, "That's too high a percentage of the audience." He goes, "Come with me." And he took the other 17 people down the hall into the men's room. This guy's at the urinal trying to do his business. Gary walks in and stands right behind him. All the other men and women of the audience cram into the room. And then Gary goes on with his act without missing a beat, right? And it's really funny. Everyone's laughing. This poor guy's at the urinal trying to do his business, kind of freaking out. The only thing that was really good that came out of it is we did make sure he washed.
The world lost Gary Shandling too early. And Gary Shandling was just too early for society, man. He was one funny motherfucker.
He was not only a talented professional comic, he was a good actor. He ended up in a lot of movies and TV shows.
Yes.
Of course, the Larry Sanders Show and the Gary Shandling Show were genius.
Yes.
He was one of the guys that helped me get going. But I have to say that another true professional that was so different on stage than he was on TV, but had huge success, was Bob Saget. Bob was one of my early acts. I met him through Dave Coulier, who Coulier was one of the guys that actually got me into the business. And Coulier and Saget were like my mentors. How do you run a club? What do you charge? How do you pay the comics? All those things I learned from the people in the industry. And Bob Saget, he actually produced and starred in 2 TV commercials like in 1982 for me for free, just to help me get the club going, and was an amazing mentor. But what was interesting was, if anybody's seen his stand-up comedy or listened to it, and you can on my podcast.
Hey, Scott, I'm going to interrupt you. Your video is frozen. So
really?
Yeah, you're caught in a wonderful pose. So this is what I love about doing live video here. And I'm just going to take a full screen right now while Scott fixes his video. I love the power of live shows because of what's just happening right now. And you got to figure it out, right? Like real life. And yeah,
it's so weird. It seems to be working on my end.
We can hear Scott talking too. I'm just going to remove you from the stage for a second here. I'm going to bring you back on a second here. I'm going to do this and then put you back on. Now you have no video.
Now I have no video. I can see myself on your show. Is that something else?
I'm not sure. You might be a little bit delayed here, but I'm seeing no video on your end right now. I'm just seeing a black box. You'll see.
Well, this is not good for Riverside.
No, StreamYard.
Oh, StreamYard. Sorry.
This is the first time that I've ever had this experience with a guest where I've had a guest lose their camera. So I'm not sure if it's a StreamYard thing or if it's a guest thing or it's just the internet. But we know that we're having some video challenges, but nobody fret. We're going to sort it out. Again, the power of doing live conversations with live guests is you get to experience what real life is like. And it's funny because I'm working on a course right now, which is how to host a daily talk show or how to have a daily conversation. And this is one of the things that you got to figure out when you're live. People are listening, but like, hey, what's this guy doing right now? Well, I'll tell you, we're helping our friend Scott get his video sorted out because right now we are still not seeing the young man on the air, though. No, let's see here.
That's so weird. I see me and everything seems to be working. I can even see me on StreamYard on your copy. I did change cameras and added a little light. Scary.
I wonder why we're not seeing you, though.
Well, I do audio podcasts. Maybe we just keep it, you talk to the screen and I'll just
there you go.
Respond.
We're always good with that.
So Keith, how did you get started? What was your first business?
Yeah. Oh yeah. So let's change around a little bit. So my first business was I ran a social media company. I started a social media company from scratch called ICUC Moderation Services.
Oh, cool.
We were kind of we were in the early days of the internet, Scott. So we were managing and moderating social content for big brands. And so when really back before TikTok, back before the way the world is today, when people would post content, my team would review it first to make sure it was appropriate before we'd post it live.
Wow. Well, you were in on the important stuff, and I'm sure it looks successful with it. I had a little bit more of a meager start. At age 17, I opened a small construction company with a couple high school buddies.
Okay.
And we painted lines in parking lots. It's called striping. But at age 17, it was quite a good way to learn about owning a business. I did the sales and the contracts, and the guys did the labor.
Yeah.
And we built that up. And then I sold out just a couple years later and went on to another adventure. But the reason I brought it up is that not only did I own a chain of comedy clubs, but as a lifelong entrepreneur, there are so many things that you learn in life that you take on to the next adventure.
Yes.
And starting off, mowing lawns and babysitting and doing stuff, newspaper routes as a kid led to a small construction company. My next business was a portable DJ system. We used to spin records. Records were these round things that were made of plastic you could hear music off of. Yes. A lot of people don't remember those. Anyway, we would spin records for weddings and school parties and bar mitzvahs and all that. And so business after business, I was learning something in each step along the way, and then just lucked into the comedy industry. As I mentioned, in 1980, I opened in August of 1980 and had some great success with that. But even after I sold, I went on to other things. I had several restaurants. I had several art galleries. Keith, I don't know if you read this in my thing. I actually owned a submarine.
A submarine, and not a
submarine. And if that wasn't fun enough, I actually had a beach shack in Hawaii.
Oh.
Settle down. I know it's hard to believe, but when you're in your 20s and you're single, owning a beach shack in Hawaii is a great way to meet girls.
I bet. How did you get into the comedy business though? Like what you said you were a producer. What moved you into opening up comedy shops?
So I was, I had a lot of other real jobs too. And at a young age, I was 23. I was a life insurance agent. Absolutely hated it, but I was good at it. and I was on vacation with my then girlfriend, soon to be wife, soon to be ex-wife, down in Los Angeles, and there was this satellite version of the Comedy Store. Most people have heard of the Comedy Store in
Yes.
Hollywood. Well, there was a satellite version in Westwood, right off of UCLA campus.
Okay.
And it was a little, smaller club, maybe 100 seats. And I went in. My dad's had a great sense of humor, and he said, "You got to go check this stand-up comedy stuff out. It's amazing. Go to this club called the Comedy Store. There's one in Westwood." And the girlfriend and I went in, and we saw Sandra Bernhardt, Dave Coulier, and a number of other acts.
Mhm.
And after the show, being an entrepreneur, one of the things I tell people is there's no reason to recreate the wheel. You want to learn how to do a business, go talk to people that do that business. So before I opened my striping company, I went and talked to striping companies. Before I opened the music business, I went and talked to portable DJs. So after the show, I'm quizzing the comics. What'd you get paid? How'd you get into this? I talked to the club manager, how many days are you open? And I collected all this info. And on the 6-hour drive back from LA, I made the decision to quit my job, go bankrupt so I was debt free, and start working on opening a comedy club.
Yeah.
So that was supposed to be the short version. It was really short.
So, and now you have Scott's comedy stuff.com, and you do remote comedy shows. Am I correct?
I've continued to produce shows for charities.
Okay.
So I'm a Rotarian. I do a couple shows every year for my Rotary Club. There's a big special needs adult facility in Placerville, just east of us. I do a big fundraiser for them, the Calusa Volunteer Firefighters, Seroptimist. And what I do is I produce comedy shows that are fundraisers. So when you're doing a fundraiser, you can charge, $50 a ticket, and they pay me enough to pay the comics, and they get to keep the rest. And then we do a raffle, and we do a couple things. But I mean, literally, we've helped raise hundreds of thousands of dollars for these charities through stand-up comedy, which is really fun.
That's a lot of fun. Now, and they're clean shows too. I noticed when I was doing some research here, they are clean comedy fundraisers. And I'm certain you bring that up because the perception is comedy is not clean.
Yeah, sadly, because we were talking about the deterioration of comedy entertainment over the years, in the last decade or so, people have gotten very loose with the F-bombs and talking politics. And, some of them have gone overly woke, the audience especially, but also the comics to fight that have gone the other way. And what I have always focused on doing, I mean, I'm not a prude. My clubs, I had some of the dirtiest comics ever on my stage. But when you're doing fundraisers, whoever the audience, if you do a clean show, and it might be considered a clean adult show, maybe like R-rated, you're going to get the same amount. If you use professionals, you're getting the same amount of laughs without offending anybody. And that is so important when you're trying to raise money.
Of course it would be. Yeah, of course it would be. Chris Rock might be one of this generation's yesterday's Jerry Seinfelds. Would you agree with that?
I think Jerry's a little bigger and a lot cleaner, but he certainly had the fame in the shows, and he is a professional. He works his trade. He is, to me, a comic artist, and for that, I give him respect. I never had a chance to work with Chris as he was coming up the ranks, but well-respected comic in the business.
I guess also what's different in today's world is that there is, like, comedy is just content, isn't it, Scott? At the end of the day, it's content, right?
Right. It's using words to paint a picture or take the audience somewhere in a funny way. I mean, one of the masters, and if you pulled up his picture, you know exactly who I'm talking about, but he's a famous actor. He's done hundreds of TV shows, lots of movies. His name's Larry Miller, and his name's not as famous as Jerry Seinfeld, but he and Jerry came from New York as part of the Funniest Men in the Universe Club. And Larry Miller could tell a story like nobody. I mean, he just took you on a trip that's funny all the way, and then the payoff was always huge. And to me, I mean, it's hard to say you have a favorite comic when you've worked with the best in the world.
Yeah.
But Larry, to me, was definitely one of the best. And everybody should go use the Googler and do Larry Miller, and you'll go, oh, that guy, because he's been on so many shows and movies. But his stand-up career, which is how he got started. In fact, if you want to hear him, he's on my podcast, Stand-Up Comedy, your host and MC, actually this week. So there's some really funny stuff out there that I recommend people check out. But if you listen, Keith, I don't mean to keep going on, but if you listen to the comedy from, I hate to age myself, my generation from the 80s and the 90s, people like Bob Saget, Gary Shandling, Dana Carvey, Jay Leno, Jerry Seinfeld, you hear them back when they were getting started, and then you go and hear somebody today, you'll see, I mean, it's crystal clear. I'm not saying that one's funnier than the other. I think so, but you make that determination. Comedy is very personal.
Yes.
It depends on what the person thinks. But what I will say is that the comedy from days gone by was so much more honed. It was worked. It's to me, the term is professional.
It's hard not to think that comedy is going to change again, Scott, with ChatGPT and large language models, right? Like that's just taking content and comedy to an entirely new level. I would love to hear
crazy. I mean, it's like the internet. It was like comedy going on TV. All these iterations of our life as we get older and things evolve, it's good and bad. ChatGPT will help people give a funnier speech, or can make a story better or funnier or darker or whatever you're trying to get out of your chat. But it also takes away the creativity of the human mind and what somebody might create out of their own sensibility. I mean, Keith, you tell me if you agree or disagree, but one of the best things about stand-up comedy is it's relatable, that if you're really going to do with an audience, you want to talk with the audience, not to them. You want to talk with them, have a conversation about something that they can relate to. That's why some of the best comedies about flying in an airplane or going to a restaurant or dating or marriage. It's because everybody in the audience is going, oh, yeah, that's happened to me.
Yes. Well, hence Jerry Seinfeld's success, right, Scott?
Exactly. Ray Romano is also really good. He turned it right into a TV show. I mean, his TV show, Everybody Loves Raymond, is all about dysfunctional families, which was in his act. He would talk about all the things that everybody could relate to, having siblings, having kids, the awkward moments that everybody's had with their parents.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention, relatability. I had a meeting yesterday about some of the content that I'm posting up on LinkedIn and social platforms, and without a doubt, the most engaged content that I post is when it's relatable. So wasn't really clear on that. The most kind of engagement I get on content when I tell a personal story. I did this. Something happened to me. I did this. Or I fell on my face. When I post content that's relatable, engagement goes like this. Just like comedy, isn't it?
Exactly. And the reason is that people are connecting with you on a personal level. And I think that and any sort of entertainment, whether it's ballet or music or a theater show or all these different forms of entertainment, even a painting on the wall, if it speaks to you, if it connects with you on a personal level, that's what makes it special to you. You know, I used to own art galleries, and the reason you have 100 different options for people to look at is because everybody's different and they're all going to relate and see different things in a painting. When when you're hearing a joke about interacting with your parents or going down to the DMV, everybody can relate to it because they've done it, but they've done it in a different way. And what the comic is doing is telling his story in a funny way. A great side example, Keith, if you have a minute.
Yeah.
Just yesterday, I was doing a recording with a good friend of mine and one of the few American Indian comics. His name's Mark Yaffe.
Okay.
He does a lot of casinos and cruise ships. And we got on the topic of dealing with our aging parents. He had his father pass away just a year ago, and his mom is dealing with Alzheimer's. And we ended up having a very poignant yet funny conversation because I'd gone through the same thing with my parents. And so it's a tragedy that you have to deal with your aging parents, but there's some funny things that everybody experiences in doing that comes out. And when you talk about it and kind of poke a little fun at it, it makes it easier to deal with and accept. Does that make sense?
That's my style of coping or discussion or creating content. I like to diffuse difficult situations with humor.
Exactly. And I think that that's why some of the more famous comics, you talk about George Carlin, he really pushed the envelope and always talked about uncomfortable things, but he did it in a humorous way, which was why people were able to relate to it and accept his opinion on things. They didn't always agree, but he did it in a way that entertained them while getting across a message. And I'm not saying all material needs to have a message. There's still some really funny knock-knock joke, but it is important to be able to relate to your audience.
Well, it's interesting to hear you say that, because I'm taking your words right now as advice, frankly, because I'm attempting with this show to do exactly what you are talking about, which is create a show. And if you notice, actually, Scott, so I'll banter with you a little bit here. So, and I think you'll appreciate this. When I started this whole venture, I purposely didn't call it a podcast. I wanted it to be a show, because in my POV, right or wrong, there's a perception in the world that a podcast, it happens every now and then. It happens once a week. Sometimes they end. They're done sometimes in somebody's closet. There's professional ones, Rogan, yours, and then there's kind of the rest of them. I did not want to be lumped into that. So I said, oh no, I'm doing a show. Purposely chose the word show. And then purposely chose the words entertain and inform, instead of inform and bore, so that I could have engaging conversation with people and use humor as the vehicle to enlighten our conversation. And then what I've also learned is that the more authentic I am with you as my audience, the more relatable you are to me. Or I'm sorry, the more relatable I am to you. Hence, my humor tends to work, and the audience tends to like what Uncle Keith is saying.
Wow, ladies and gentlemen, Keith in the lab. Woo, that is so incredible.
Just trying, man. Just trying.
It's funny that you said that, because I think that it's those little nuances that make us stand out. So I produce shows for other people, podcast shows, and they're always in podcasts. It's called episodes, right? Episode 1, 2, 3. Yes. But just like you, mine aren't episodes, they're shows. Hey, this week's show features Dana Carvey or Harry Anderson or, Yakov Smirnoff. I'm throwing out names that people from the 80s would know.
Yeah.
But anyway, Yakov Smirnoff, for those that don't remember, was a famous Russian comic. He ended up being a speechwriter for Ronald Reagan. Yeah. And back when he just came out from Russia, he worked my club. He barely spoke English, and he learned how to talk by watching TV. So that led to some funny material. But it was one time, it was, I think it was Saget on stage, and Yakov was the opening act, and it was the July 4th weekend. And I don't know how this came about, but right in the middle of Bob's act, Yakov came running on stage, and he had held a bottle rocket to his ass and ran around. I'm a Russian missile. Ran around Bob a couple times and then ran off stage. Just no explanation. Totally interrupted the show, but it was a very funny moment.
Yeah. So I grew up, so I'm Ukrainian. I grew up with Nestor Pester up here in Canada.
Oh,
do you know Nestor Pester?
Just heard of him, but that's exactly the same idea.
And funny as, right? Just good Ukrainian humor, right? So yeah, that's, but we're talking old school 70s, 80s humor, right? So which is very, very different than what it is today.
Yeah, right. And there's plenty of people that it's so funny, because the intro to my show is stand-up comedy, your host and MC, where we showcase the comedy of the famous and not so famous, because there's a lot of people that are true professionals that aren't household names. Steve Bruner, Tim Bedore, Milt Abel, I can go on and on. Will Durst. There's a lot of very, very funny people that nobody would remember their name, but if you heard their comedy, you'd go, oh, that guy's a pro. And they may have even done a Tonight Show or something, but not everybody. I call them the one percenters, the golden ticket few that got their own TV show or something.
Well, so I'll tell you, you forgot my name.
I'm so sorry, Keith.
Like,
I
what
should
the
have
hell?
thrown you in there.
What the hell?
I think you're famous, though. I mean,
I invite you to my show and you don't even put me in the 1%. Like, what the hell? I don't even know where to go with that comment. But I will tell you, my new friend Scott. Right now, this show is in the clubs, little 200-seat club, right? And right over there, I can see the little concert hall, right? And then just past the concert hall is the arena we're going to be at in a little bit. And then past the arena, Scott, we're going to be hitting up the stadiums.
there you go.
We're just
You know, it's obvious you've been around the business because you just perfectly laid out the way it should be. And a lot of the guys I got a chance to work with in the 80s and 90s, and they're still out there today. If the good ones got their start in the small rooms at the open mics, at the comedy clubs, and then they earned the way to get up the next step of the ladder. And some of them stop at concerts. You know, Brian Regan, very, very funny, popular, famous comic right now, but you don't see him a lot on TV, but boy, he sells out every concert he does everywhere he goes.
Yeah.
So, you know, not everybody gets that golden ticket and gets their own sitcom, but there's a lot of levels of success in between.
I'm fascinated by that. What's that fellow's name you mentioned?
Brian Regan.
Brian Regan. You know what fascinates me about that is that it makes you wonder if, you know, I know there's a lot of people that are aware of him. I'm not, unfortunately, but it might be like, because you said he didn't have a TV show. It might be like one of those situations today where less is more, right? Creating an allure. I would wonder as a comedian, creating an allure around my brand and my content might create more demand for my content and my brand because comedy is so readily available. Do you follow my thinking, Scott?
Exactly. You do want something. It's using the same analogy I used before. When you have a popular painting or piece of art, what makes it special? It's unique. It's rare.
Yes.
There's one or just a couple. So what makes a comic or any entertainer, could be the same as a musician. You know, when you what made the Beatles? Well, they were the first to do what they did. A lot of people copied it. A lot of people had success getting part of the way, but there's only one, the Beatles.
Yeah.
You can go on to, you know, Freddie Mercury. There was only one unique person that was able to do what he did. And that uniqueness, whether it's art or on stage entertainment, is going to carry you at, you know, a certain level. You know, it's interesting. We're talking about stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
And how you can take it to success. But the people that are really invested in it as an art form, even after their success, and I'm talking about Jay Leno and Jerry Seinfeld, what are they doing now? They're multi-millionaires. They don't have to work. They've had their TV success. Guess what they're doing? They're back out on the road because they love the industry. They love writing comedy and they love performing to a live audience, which to the purist in the industry is so much better than performing to a TV camera.
Oh, I believe it. I absolutely believe it. I absolutely believe it. Scott, we're coming up on the top of the hour. We're going to wind our conversation down. But since I have an expert in the lab who does a successful podcast, who's successfully produced.
Be sure to introduce me.
Yeah, exactly. Scott's comedy stuff. Yeah, exactly. And we'll talk about your podcast in a second. But I would love some free advice. What could I do better here on the show so that we can entertain our audience better?
Well, actually, Keith, I think you do a really good job on your podcast, and I have looked at a few of your shows. And what makes you a really good podcaster and a very good host is that, one, you listen, two, you ask the right questions and you listen to the answers. A lot of people want to rattle off their questions and then they don't take the time to listen to their guest and, you know, get that conversation going. But also, you're not taking yourself too serious. Hey, this is the Keith Show and I'm in the lab and you should shut up and listen to me. What I've noticed is that you're really good at bringing on guests that are going to be interesting to your audience. And you, just like Johnny Carson, I'm not putting you quite that high, but Johnny Carson and David Letterman, what made them so successful in late night TV is that it's hard to be a good host. You have to be able to be personable, interact and relate to your audience, but you also have to be able to ask the right question and bring information out from your guest, but then shut up and listen.
So thank you First of all, thank you. I appreciate the advice, but I want to tell you something you said, which is probably the most meaningful thing I've heard all week. I'm really trying to do something with this show, and whether I succeed or fail with it, Scott, is really kind of not the point. I grew up with the Lettermans, the Carsons, the Lenos, the Tom Schneiders, the people that would sit, and I loved sitting down with Tom Schneider on 11:30 or after Letterman at midnight and just listening to him sit down and talk with Scott Edwards for an hour. You know what I mean?
Like the smart host.
Oh man, I just loved that dialogue. Larry King, love him or hate him, but just those kind of conversations where you can sit down with somebody like yourself and just have a really wonderful human conversation. So I take all your words to my heart and I take them as a compliment and I thank you for that. And then you said one last thing, which is also very meaningful to me because somebody said this to me last week as well, which is, Keith, one of the things that I like about you as a host is that you fanboy over your guests like other old school talk show hosts. Jimmy Fallon, when he brings a guest, he just becomes a big fan of them. And I feel like when I do that with my guests, and you, again, as a show producer and as a comedy guy, Scott, I believe that makes me more relatable to you listening.
You and your audience, right? Not only are you connecting with your guest, but you're connecting with your audience when you keep it real. It's not necessarily, there's times to put on the show and get the jazz hands going.
Yes, exactly.
You want to create energy and have some fun and some interest in the topic and in the guest. But if you don't make it relatable and in your case, you're really good at making it conversational. So it's not too, you've probably been a guest on a few shows. I know I have, where it's very regimented. Well, my first question is this. You have 30 seconds to answer. And here's my next question. And you're like, well, that's not fun for the audience. I don't think. It might be informative, but it's certainly not as entertaining as this. Now, to be honest, Keith, we've not gone deep into any subject. We've talked about being an entrepreneur. We talked about owning a comedy club and name dropped a few entertainers. But what was, I think, fun for me and hopefully fun for your audience was that it was a conversation that would be fun to listen to.
That's my goal. So thank you for
validating you.
No,
I expect a check in the mail.
Yeah, thanks for the validation, and I will send you the check. I appreciate that. I'll tell you right now. I had a gentleman named Matt Kundell on my show earlier last week. Actually, Matt is a former radio veteran, podcast expert, been in the audio industry forever. And I put a clip on LinkedIn today humorously, which was, he's like, Keith, the people come not for the guests. Sorry, Scott. They come for the host. I'm like, I fucking knew it all along. They're always coming for me.
Exactly.
I try to bring self-deprecating humor into this because I think that's just, again, back to humor, right, Scott? That's what
right
brings relatability.
But also, and if you don't mind me saying, that one of the things that I made my comedy club successful was that it was all the comics were booked based on my sense of humor. So if there was somebody that I didn't want to work with or didn't think was funny, guess what? They didn't appear at my club. I shouldn't name drop, but there was a few people that were popular at the time that just weren't my cup of tea, right? So what makes your show interesting to your audience is it's your taste in guest. It's your taste in conversation. It's your experience and humanizing the interaction that really makes it more inviting to your audience. And that is so important because it's that connection that will take your audience to the next level. It takes you to the next level. And in my particular case, you make your guest feel welcome. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much. Use connection, the C word. I use curiosity as my compass, another C word, because I believe if I'm curious, it keeps my audience curious. I had a guest on my show a couple of weeks ago, and I would invite you to listen to this. He was telling me about his business, and he was, explaining just like we're having a conversation right now. But in and amongst his words, Scott, he let slip that he used to sell F-18 fighter jets. And I'm a curious young man. I'm like, hold on a second here. Let's just rewind the tape. Did you say you used to sell F-18? He's like, yeah. I'm like, holy fuck, man. Let's talk about that for a while. So that curiosity, because I think if you're listening, you're like, Keith, you got to ask the question about the F-18 fighter jets, because who sells F-18 fighter jets? Do you know what I mean? Right? Like, it's just, that is the fuel that, and again, I go back to even how we've had this whole conversation today. Curiosity seems to be lost in the world because content is so readily available. That's people just aren't as curious. I wonder.
Yeah, so I was a little hurt. You didn't ask about my submarine.
Well, because I was too focused
I
on.
know your audience is going, "What the fuck?" He had a
Well, because I was too focused on the hot tub with Dana Carvey. And I was too focused on Tom, Dick, and Harry in a sentence. But hey, let's talk about the submarine.
No. I was just saying that the guy that sold F-15s, that would be very cool and something I definitely want to hear about.
But no, listen, I got the time. I want to hear about. So who the fuck owns a submarine? Honest to God, because hey, also, because now we're having some fun here, Scott. I need a hook. I need a hook for the YouTube thumbnail. So the hook is either going to be this guy was in a hot tub with Dana Carvey, or the hook is going to be this guy owned a submarine. So, tell me about the submarine story, man.
So I'll make the short version, Keith, and I didn't mean to throw that out there asking for you to ask, but
no, man,
it was an exciting part of my life, and I want to make sure everybody understands I lost hundreds of thousands of dollars on this submarine. It was a huge debacle, but it was so much fun. So some friends of mine own a company called Subsea Systems, and Sea Trek and Subsea Systems are all over the world. They're tourist underwater experiences, and I was a co-owner of the company. And then out of the blue, these guys called me over to Honolulu, Hawaii, and Pearl Harbor, and they asked me to help them launch a submarine. So I went over and I did some work, and I helped them, and they launched their first submarine, the Nautilus One, and it's a tourist submarine. Okay. And I go, man, this is so cool. I want one of those. So I bought one. And we built it and we launched it in Monterey, California. And it was really exciting. I got to drive it. We took people out and showed them the bay and the sea otters and the sea lions and the kelp forest. However, Monterey has very cold water. And for those that don't know oceanographic stuff, it had a algae bloom. So every time we took the submarine out, the algae would fog up the windows so that people couldn't see everything. So I had to pay a scuba diver to go along and clean the windows on every ride. Well, guess what? Huge financial loss. So after just a couple years, we ended up selling the submarine. I lost my ass, but it was a lot of fun. And we sold it to the Wrigley Gum family. And it's still running at a Catalina island. It's called the Nautilus 4. So you can see I worked on Nautilus 1. Mine was Nautilus 4. And that's my submarine story.
Dude, I've never had so much fun talking to a black box. Because right now I'm seeing it's a black box. But why didn't you tell me the submarine story at the beginning of the hour? Because I could have.
It's just one of my side gigs. I mean, it's like side gigs are my thing. I love going into different businesses. I've had a travel agency. I had the Beach Shack in Hawaii. I've had a couple restaurants, the art galleries, the comedy clubs. It's all adventures that are fun and exciting. And I've lost a lot of money. I've been bankrupt a couple times. I've been filthy rich a couple times. So it's just life.
Just like our live show right now, right? Talking to a black box. I got to pause for a second here. I'll edit this out in the post show, but I got to pause and take in this whole. Because generally after my shows, it's funny, Scott. After my shows, I have to go and I have to go and get away from everybody for a little bit because I'm so jacked up. I'm so engaged. I listen. I kind of step away for a little bit. Well, now this afternoon, you've hijacked my entire afternoon with this one question. Who the fuck owns a submarine? Well, I now know a guy who owned a submarine and had to have a scuba diver because the algae bloom.
What are the odds?
What are the odds? So the last time I heard of submarines is that tragedy over on the east coast of Canada there. So the fact that you were in that sub business is I don't know what this.
It's just you have to go through life.
I love it.
A lot of people work in some cubicle and they save $100 a month and they hope to retire. That's not me, man. I'm always on the edge. I lost a ton of money. I've made a lot of money, had a lot of fun. And it's those life experiences, owning a chain of comedy clubs was certainly one of the highlights of my life, but it was just one chapter. And all the businesses I've owned were a learning experience, were fun. I made them as fun as I could. And that was why I feel at my tender young age that I've had a full life and continue to do things. Would it be okay to tell the audience what I'm doing now?
So I was going to set it up by say, hey, what are you doing now? What should the audience know about you? What have I not asked that the audience needs to know about you? Plug the website, plug your business. Please use this forum to.
Well, I didn't want to take advantage of your audience, Keith, and I'm not selling anything. I don't make any money on any of this. It's just my next adventure I'm having fun with. If you like stand-up comedy, you got to check out the podcast, Stand-Up Comedy, Your Host and MC. That's Stand-Up Comedy, Your Host and MC. Available on all platforms. And every other week, I interview somebody from the industry. And then the opposite week, I actually share comedy shows and comedy sets from the famous and not so famous. And some people, my shows run 40 minutes to an hour. Some people like short comedy shows. So I have another podcast called Comedy Appetizers, and they only run about 5 or 6 minutes. Comedy Appetizers, pure stand-up comedy or stories each and every week. Check it out. But I also produce shows for other people. Larry Wilson has a show called How to Talk to Humans. I'm the producer on that. And my newest adventure, and I'm sorry, Keith, but I want to share this for people that have children and grandchildren. I just started producing a children's podcast for ages 3 to 8 called Ock's Amazing Adventures. And it's just so fun for me, and the kids seem to love it. But Ock is this child that is going out and going to the fire department, or he goes to Kenya's for safari, or he goes to outer space in the space station. Ock gets to have these adventures and share them with children.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Podcasts are a big part of our conversation here in the lab. We bring guests. We talk about creating them. I'm putting a course together around how to do a daily live show. Talk to me about your experience before we say goodbye, Scott, about doing the podcast and what's been successful, what hasn't been successful for you.
Well, it's interesting, and thanks for asking, Keith. I've had all these amazing life experiences, and I've always been a capitalist. I had to make money.
Yes.
But in the several years ago, I sold my last business, which was a large insurance brokerage. Not much fun, but it made good money. And when I sold it and retired, my wife said, you are not going to sit around on your ass. You're going to do something.
Yeah.
And I really missed my days in the comedy industry. That really, as I said, was a pinnacle of my life. So I reconnected with comics and I started interviewing them. And then when I owned the comedy club, I did an album, I did a CD, I did a few other things. So I had all this content, and I go, how do I share this content? And a podcast was a great thing to do. Kind of a slight funny story. I was telling my wife I spent a year and a half and I wrote a book about my life in the comedy business. And my wife when we got to the end, she goes, no one's going to read your stupid book. You should do a podcast. This was back in 2000.
Thanks, honey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I took her advice. I researched. I talked to people like you that know the business. I learned about it. And then before COVID, in early 2001, I launched my first podcast, and now I have 4 of them.
Good for you.
I love being able to connect with an audience. It's always entertainment based. I try to teach on the kids one, and there's always some knowledge in the comedy ones, but it is all about just entertaining an audience. I did it when I was young. I get to do it now. I feel like I've kind of come full circle.
And are you making a little bit of coin doing it?
Nope. I don't make any money. I've failed at that, Keith. You'd be surprised. As a capitalist, I know how to market. I know how to sell things. But in podcasting, I've tried thrown a few hooks in the water to see if I can make a couple bucks, and they've all failed. But I love doing it so much, I just keep going. My main podcast, Stand-Up Comedy, Host and MC, just hit 150,000 downloads and has been out there for 4 years, something like 350 shows.
Yes.
And I'm just having a blast with it. So hopefully your audience will check it out and like it.
Yeah.
But Keith, what you're doing is so much deeper, more exciting, and more interesting than what I do. I get to share my love of stand-up comedy, but it's kind of personal. It's me and the mic and the recording machine. And when I interview people, it's a conversation like you do.
Mhm.
But my shows are once a week and the interviews are every other week. It's kind of spread out. You're doing this day after day. You're working it. You've got the live presentation. You're bringing in guests and you're entertaining and informing yourself. I mean, you're really the whole package. So congratulations.
Thank you. Trying. And you know, I always joke, Scott, I've never had so much fun making no money. However, I know that the money will come. And I believe that if you create great quality content, be obsessively kind to the people you're talking with, like yourself as a guest, and be professional and just treat others like you want to be treated, people will notice. And, you know, by showing up every single day, people will notice. And then eventually somebody say, hey, Mr. Bilous, yeah, we'd like to hire you to do something. Okay, I can wash dishes.
Well, Mr. Bilous, you're much more talented than that.
But
I think if anybody listening was thinking about getting into podcasting, much like all the other businesses I did, you have to go in because you believe in it, because your heart is with it, because you're going to enjoy it, because you may make money like my comedy club chain, or you may lose money like my submarine, but it's the journey that matters. And in podcasting, you may end up making a couple bucks, but do it because you love it. Do it because you care. Do it because you're interested. Because if you don't care and if you're not interested, trust me, your audience won't be.
Yeah, isn't that true? Isn't that true? Well, you
Great.
know what, Scott? We wind it up this way. We'll wind it up with a human bit of conversation. One of the reasons I've done this show has been to connect with human beings. And I connect with a new human being every single day, which fills me with gratitude, which, as my listeners will always hear me say, allows me to say back to you as my guest. I start my morning with my vitamin D, my vitamin E, my vitamin C. And then when I meet my guests at noon, I get full of vitamin G, gratitude. So I offer you a dose of vitamin G for joining me today in the lab, Scott. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, man.
Oh, it's been a blast. And I meant everything I said. Continued success, Keith. I think what you're doing is entertaining, informative, and just fun. And that's, you know, if you're not having fun in life, what's the point?
It's true. I completely agree with you. And we'll leave you with those last words, Scott. So audience, I'm going to throw Scott into the green room here, even though he's a black box and we haven't been able to see him a little bit, but I'm going to throw Scott into the green room. Scott, I'm going to put you back there. I'm going to say goodbye to the audience and come back and walk you out. Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for listening and have a great day.
Awesome. All right. So Scott Edwards joined us here in the lab. And so here's what I took from today's conversation. There's music up for this one. So I enjoyed talking to a black box more than I thought. Yeah, there's a black box. I just talked to it, but it was like Michael Ryder's kit. All I was missing was like the red vibrating every time Scott was talking. What I also took from today's conversation with Scott was you shouldn't own a submarine, and you should not own a submarine, especially if the water you're going to put in has algae bloom, because then you're just going to be, yep. I'm not even going to say the bad word. Don't buy a submarine, nation. So we've learned today on the show, submarines are off the table for any entrepreneurial ventures. So you'll never hear Keith buying one, and I'm going to encourage anybody in my audience never to consider buying a submarine. Boom. The other thing we want to also be aware of is that if you're sitting with a comedian, don't go get in the hot tub. Hey, if you missed that, go back, listen to the earlier part of the episode where we talked about our friend, our Scott Edwards, the guy with 3 first names, spending some time in the hot tub with Dana Carvey. I say no more. Hey, we're here tomorrow. 2 dads in a lab trying to be not 1, not 5, not 4, but 2% better. Yeah, just 2. We can't afford to go 5% better. We just got no time. So Keith and Di Manuel, the Friday segment, 2 dads in a lab trying to be 2% better. Scott, we got another show live tomorrow, noon Central, 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern. And then, of course, we drop it on demand in all the podcast stations out there. Stations? Yeah, is that the word I just used? What am I, fucking radio? Anyways, I'm going to get out of here. I'm going to turn some music up. I'm going to go walk out the black box. Maybe Scott's in the black box. See you guys tomorrow.